Welcome to Personal Injury Claims Explained by Foyle Legal, your trusted source for personal injury claims in Western Australia. Each week, we simplify complex legal issues, from motor vehicle accidents to workplace injuries, so you can confidently navigate your rights and secure the compensation you deserve.
Hey everyone, welcome back for another deep dive.
Always exciting to be back.
Today we're going to be looking at something a little bit different. We're going to be talking about motorbike and quad bike accidents in Western Australia.
Yeah, a topic a lot of people don't think about until they unfortunately have to.
Yeah, and we'll be focusing on the challenges of securing fair compensation under the Civil Liability Act of 2002.
Definitely a lot of complexities there that are worth exploring.
So to help us kind of unpack all this, we're going to be looking at a specific case from 2017, Wishart, Sandy, Mana. And we've got the actual court judgment here. And we're also going to be drawing on some insights from a blog post by Foyle Legal.
Great resources to really dive deep into the intricacies of this case.
Yeah, so think of this deep dive as like a roadmap, right? We're going to guide you through the legal maze. And hopefully by the end of it, you'll have a better understanding of what to do if you ever find yourself in a similar situation.
Absolutely. Knowledge is power, especially when it comes to legal matters.
All right, so let's set the scene. Imagine you're out in the Nangara Pine State Forest, beautiful day, enjoying the trails on your motorbike or your quad bike.
Sounds idyllic.
It is, until, bam, head-on collision.
Oh, that's never good.
No, it's not. And that's exactly what happened in this case. July 13, 2003, our claimant was riding his Kawasaki quad bike, and he's hit by a Suzuki motorbike coming the wrong way.
Oof, that's a recipe for disaster.
It is, and this is where the Civil Liability Act comes into play.
Right, because this legislation sets the framework for determining fault and compensation in these situations.
Exactly. And in this particular case, things get a bit more complicated because guess what? The motorbike rider, the defendant, didn't even show up to court.
Wow, really? That definitely adds a twist to the story.
It does. And it meant that the claimant had to prove his case, the extent of his injuries and all that, without the defendant's testimony.
So the burden of proof was solely on him.
Exactly. Which just goes to show how crucial it is to gather evidence right from the start.
Absolutely. Every detail matters.
So let's talk about those injuries. The claimant suffered a closed head injury with brain swelling, a fractured clavicle, open fractures in his lower leg, plus all the soft tissue injuries and ongoing pain.
Ouch, that sounds pretty rough.
It was, and these injuries weren't just physically painful, they had a huge impact on his life. He lost his job, he couldn't play sports with his kids, just a whole cascade of negative consequences.
Right, it's like a domino effect. One injury leads to another problem and so on.
And what makes this even more significant is that the claimant was only 25 years old at the time of the accident.
So still quite young and with a lot of life ahead of him.
Exactly. And he didn't have any formal qualifications beyond year 10. He was working as a shift miller.
Okay, so a physically demanding job, but it allowed him to support his family.
Right, and these injuries essentially took that away from him. They limited his earning capacity, his future prospects, everything.
So how did the court take this into account when calculating the compensation?
Well, they looked at his pre-accident earnings as a shift miller and used that as a basis to figure out what he'd lost, both in terms of past income and future earning potential.
So they tried to put a dollar value on the impact of these injuries on his ability to earn a living.
Yeah, and the total amount awarded to him was pretty substantial. Get this, $968,464.
Wow, that's a significant sum.
It is. But remember, this wasn't just about covering his medical bills. This figure includes compensation for his lost income, past and future, the cost of ongoing care, and also the overall impact on his quality of life.
Right, because the court recognizes that these kinds of accidents have far-reaching consequences that go beyond just the initial physical harm.
Exactly. It's a good reminder that when you're talking about compensation, you need to consider the long-term impact, not just the immediate expenses.
Absolutely. It's about making the victim whole again as much as possible.
Now, remember how we mentioned that the defendant didn't show up to court?
Yeah.
Well, according to Foyle Legal, that actually played a role in how the court approached the case. Well, it meant that the claimant had to really build a rock-solid case, relying heavily on medical evidence and clear arguments about his losses.
So it highlights the importance of having strong legal representation right from the get-go.
Exactly, because you never know how the other party is going to act or what legal hurdles you might encounter.
True, it's always better to be prepared.
And that's what we're going to be diving into next. We'll explore some of the practical steps you can take after an accident to protect your rights and ensure you're in the best possible position to seek fair compensation.
Sounds like valuable advice for anyone out there.
It is.
So, one thing that really struck me when reading through this case was how it highlights the long-term consequences of accidents, like things that you might not think about immediately after the initial impact.
Right. Like what kinds of things are we talking about here?
Well, there's a term in legal jargon called gratuitous services, and this essentially refers to the care and assistance that someone needs after an accident that they would normally handle themselves, like, everyday tasks like cooking, cleaning, dressing themselves, even driving.
Okay, so because of his injuries, the claimant in this case couldn't do those things anymore.
Exactly. And, those services have value.
Right.
The court recognizes that the claimant's family had to step in and provide that care, and that's a burden on them, both in terms of time and effort.
Yeah, it's like a hidden cost, but a very real one.
Absolutely. It's a domino effect. The accident impacts not just the individual, but their entire support network.
And the court actually took that into account when calculating the compensation.
Yes, they did. And that's why it's so crucial to look at the bigger picture, right? Beyond just the initial medical bills, you have to consider all these other factors that come into play.
It makes you realize how important it is to have someone on your side who understands all these intricacies.
Absolutely. Having the right legal guidance can make a world of difference.
Speaking of which, Foyle Legal had some interesting points in their blog post about this case, especially regarding the Civil Liability Act.
Yeah, they did a great job of breaking down some of the key aspects.
What were some of the takeaways that stood out to you?
Well, one thing they emphasized was how the act aims to strike a balance. On one hand, it wants to ensure that people who are injured due to someone else's negligence receive fair compensation.
Right, so it's about protecting victims.
Exactly. But on the other hand, it also tries to prevent excessive payouts, to keep insurance premiums reasonable and to make sure the system isn't being abused.
So it's about finding that sweet spot where victims are protected, but the system as a whole remains sustainable.
Precisely. And to do that, the Act outlines various factors that the court considers when determining negligence and the amount of compensation. Things like, the severity of the injuries, the impact on earning capacity, the need for ongoing care, even the claimant's age and life expectancy all come into play.
It sounds like a pretty complex calculation with a lot of moving parts.
It is, and that's why understanding the Act and how it applies to your specific situation is so important.
Yeah, it's not something you want to try and figure out on your own.
No, definitely not. Having expert legal advice can really help you navigate this complex process.
So let's shift gears a bit and talk about practical advice. What were some of the tips that Foyle Legal shared for people who might find themselves in a similar situation?
Well, the first and foremost, and this might seem obvious, but it's worth repeating, seek immediate medical attention after an accident.
Yeah, even if you think you're okay.
Exactly, because sometimes injuries don't manifest right away.
Right, adrenaline can mask a lot of things in those initial moments.
Exactly. So get checked out by a medical professional, even if you feel fine. And then, as soon as you're able, contact a lawyer specializing in personal injury claims.
Don't wait, don't procrastinate.
No, because they can guide you through the process, explain your rights, and ensure you meet all the necessary deadlines.
Because I imagine trying to navigate all of this on your own while dealing with injuries and the emotional fallout of an accident, that's got to be overwhelming.
It is incredibly so. And a good lawyer will handle communication with insurance companies, gather evidence, build a strong case on your behalf, allowing you to focus on recovery.
Okay, so speaking of evidence, what kind of things should you be gathering after an accident?
Everything you can think of, photos and videos of the accident scene, witness statements, police reports, medical records, even a journal documenting your pain levels and limitations. All of this can be valuable in supporting your claim.
So it's about painting a complete picture of what happened and how it's affected you.
Precisely. And remember, the burden of proof rests on the claimant. So the more evidence you have to support your claim, the stronger your position will be.
Foyle Legal also talked about the importance of time limits.
Right. There are strict deadlines for filing a claim in Western Australia.
So don't wait. Don't assume you have plenty of time.
No, because missing those deadlines can jeopardize your chances of receiving compensation.
So contact a lawyer as soon as possible to make sure you're on track.
Absolutely. Now, there's another interesting concept that Foyle Legal highlighted in their analysis: loss of amenities.
Okay, remind me what that means again.
So it essentially refers to the impact the injuries have on your enjoyment of life, like being unable to participate in hobbies, play sports, or do things you once loved.
So in this case, the claimant's inability to ride his motorbike or play with his kids would fall under that category.
Exactly. And the court recognizes that these limitations diminish your quality of life, and they factor that into the compensation calculation.
It's like putting a price tag on the things that bring you joy, which I imagine is difficult to do.
It is, but it's an important part of ensuring that victims receive fair compensation.
It's about recognizing that these accidents have a ripple effect.
Exactly. They affect not just your physical health, but also your emotional well-being, your relationships, your ability to enjoy life to the fullest.
This is all incredibly insightful, and I think it really highlights the complexity of these cases.
It does, and it underscores the importance of having expert legal guidance to navigate this process and ensure that you receive what you're entitled to.
Okay, so I think we've covered a lot of ground here, but there's one crucial piece of the puzzle that we haven't talked about yet. The actual calculation of damages.
Right. How did the court arrive at that significant sum of nearly $1 million?
Well, that's what we're going to delve into next.
Okay, so let's unpack that nearly $1 million figure. It's not just a random number, right? The court had to carefully assess each category of damages to arrive at that amount.
Yeah, so walk me through it. What were the main components of the compensation in this case?
All right, so the biggest chunk by far was for what's called future economic loss, which came out to a little over $730,000. This part basically recognizes that because of his injuries, the claimant's ability to earn a living, to work as he did before, was severely diminished.
Okay, that makes sense. So if he can't work like he used to, he needs financial support to make up for that lost income, right?
Exactly, and to calculate this, the court considered his age, his pre-accident earnings, and the likelihood that he would have continued working in a similar capacity for many years to come, if the accident hadn't happened.
So they're essentially trying to project what his earnings would have been throughout his working life had he not been injured.
Precisely. Then there's past economic loss, which covers the income he lost from the time of the accident up to the point of the court judgment. That was around $60,000 in this case.
So that fills in the gap between the accident and when the future economic loss kicks in.
Yeah. Then we have general damages, which is a little over $136,000. This category is a bit more, I guess you could say, subjective. It covers things like pain and suffering, loss of enjoyment of life, the overall impact of the injuries on his well-being.
So it's recognizing that this accident didn't just affect his body and his ability to earn money, but also his overall quality of life, his mental and emotional state.
Exactly. It's an attempt to compensate for those intangible losses, the things that are harder to quantify.
Makes sense. It's not just about the physical and financial impact, but also the emotional and psychological toll.
Right. And then finally, there were smaller amounts awarded for past and future medical expenses and for something called gratuitous care.
Okay, remind me again, what's gratuitous care?
So gratuitous care refers to the value of the care and assistance provided by family members or friends that the claimant wouldn't have needed if the accident hadn't occurred. Things like help with household chores, personal care, getting around.
So it recognizes that these loved ones are stepping in to fill a void created by the claimant's injuries.
Precisely. And by including this as part of the compensation, the court acknowledges the burden that's placed on those caregivers.
Wow, this whole breakdown has been really eye-opening. It's like a crash course in personal injury law.
It is fascinating, isn't it? It really highlights how much goes into determining what fair compensation looks like in these cases.
It does, and it definitely underscores the importance of having expert legal guidance to navigate this whole process, to make sure you're getting what you're entitled to.
Absolutely. Having someone on your side who knows the ins and outs of the law can make a world of difference.
So for our listeners out there, what would you say is the key takeaway from all of this? What's the one thing they should remember, even if they never find themselves in this exact situation?
I'd say the most important thing is awareness, just being aware of your rights, having a basic understanding of how the Civil Liability Act works. That can be incredibly empowering, whether you're a writer, a driver, or just a concerned citizen.
It's like having a toolkit for life, right? You might not need every tool every day, but when you do need them, you're sure glad you have them.
Exactly. And even if you never personally experience an accident, this knowledge can be helpful in supporting friends, family, or anyone in your community who might be going through something similar.
It's about being informed, being prepared, and if something does happen, remember, seeking legal help early on can make a huge difference in the outcome.
Couldn't agree more. Knowledge is power, especially when dealing with the legal system.
Well said. And on that note, I think we've done a pretty good job of unpacking this complex but incredibly important topic.
I think so too. Hopefully our listeners found this deep dive both insightful and useful.
I hope so too. Stay safe out there, everyone, and remember, ride smart, know your rights, and never hesitate to seek expert guidance if you need it.
Great advice. Thanks for tuning in, everyone.
And until next time, keep those wheels turning.
Thanks for tuning in to Personal Injury Claims explained by Foyle Legal. Remember, this podcast is for informational purposes and isn't legal advice. For advice specific to your situation, visit us at Foyle Legal. And don't forget to subscribe or leave a review.